this eternal drama of our salvation playing out from the beginning of creation.
Our faith itself is inherently dramatic.
It's so dramatic.
And yet this is how our God loves.
He loves dramatic.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, we're a little nervous because this is like really legit. This is serious stuff. Yeah. All right.
Oh, welcome back
To
Dramatic Catholics.
nice. Yeah. Today we're actually at the Diocese of Phoenix.
In their studio.
In their studio.
Yeah.
They let us borrow it. So
It's pretty legit.
yeah. So we're off campus today, but we have a very special guest, which is why we're here. Her name is Leila Miller. She is. Would you say author? Or how, since you kind of compiled, we'll talk about what your book is about, but
Yeah, I have some books that I've authored, but this particular book that we're going to talk about, I'm more the editor.
gotcha. Okay, so she edited a book called Primal Loss, The Now Adult Children of Divorce Speak. So if you haven't listened, or if you haven't read it, we'll put it in the comments on
And
where you can get that. But yeah, she's here with us, so if you want to say a little hi to the
It's so great to be with everyone. I really appreciate the time. It's a topic that's not easy,
Yeah.
but I think it's important. So I appreciate you inviting me.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. We also have David Portugal.
Hello.
Yeah, our regular.
Regular.
Our regular.
He-
now.
Semi-regular.
Yeah. Are you a guest anymore? No.
I think you're part of this.
If it works.
Lucky.
But yeah, before we get started with anything, if you can lead us in opening prayer, that'd be great.
Sure. I'd love to repeat a prayer that I always sign in the books when somebody asks for a signed book, and that is, may God bless all marriages, and may Mother Mary protect and comfort the children of divorce. And then we could just say, Hail Mary,
Full of grace, the
Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
In the Father, the Son,
and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Yeah, I actually have a signed copy too.
I wonder, did I-
Yours right there. Yeah.
Oh, that was the truncated version. I should have given the whole thing. My
Yeah.
goodness.
We had, or David had introduced me to you years ago. My parents had recently separated at that time, but you gave a talk at this little Catholic coffee shop that was down the street from our parish. So that was
Yes.
really cool. My dad actually went with me.
Oh, I remember that talk very well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That was
it
a
was
really,
beautiful.
it was a good night.
Yeah, I have to just say personally, you left a lasting impression on me the very first time I heard you speak here at the DPC. And I remember just being mesmerized at the content and in the way that you delivered it. And I became a fan.
Thank you.
I had to go introduce myself. Yeah, I'm a fanboy that way. Especially all things Catholic. And began to follow you on social media. Yeah.
That's always dangerous. Scary.
Now it is. It wasn't back then. But I love the fact that you're not afraid to speak up and speak on truth. I don't know. I just find it very admirable. And when you were looking to put this together, I followed you on. I follow you on Facebook. I'm still on Facebook.
Yeah.
Not on MySpace anymore. But I remember when you were looking for people to contribute.
Oh, wow.
And when the book came out, I've been a fan, and I know you've been on other topics, and you're off and running. But this has been a mainstay and a staple at St. John Vianney at our parish in the work that I get to do and that we get to do with Delilah, with the RE families, and Esmeralda and the youth ministry, and myself, adult faith formation. This topic of marriage and failed relationships, it's so common, unfortunately, that not just young people, but grown, right, adult children of divorce don't even know how to process their childhood or even their adult years.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I know when you co-authored the book with Trent Horn, I was on it, but this Primal Loss, it's all over our office because if we're going to encounter the people of the parish, this seems to be the same narrative through the ages. And I can't thank you enough. I can't thank you enough that you listened to the Holy Spirit and you acted upon it. And for all 70 people who contributed, it wasn't in vain. It leaves us reeling in the office whenever we crack it open. It's one of those things that you can only read a chapter or two, and then you got to put it down and really process it, and how it affects you and your loved ones.
Yeah,
For sure.
you're right on that. And I have to say, I caveat everything by saying that when I say things that are strong about the Catholic faith and maybe are hard to hear, people don't really want to hear it, it's often because I was in the position of holding the more cultural position before. So I'm almost self-correcting. I held the position that, well, if someone's really suffering or if there's a problem, I helped a couple of friends decide to get divorced before this. I did things that and I've since confessed, because looking back, I'm like, no way should that have happened. But I didn't know, because it's just so common. It's so ubiquitous. I always say the Catholics are against divorce in theory, but not in practice. And where the rubber, hits the road is when it comes to our own family and friends. Because I would teach I taught the Catholic faith for a long time before this book, and marriage and family and, defended marriage and all that. And I meant it. I really do believe everything that I taught. However, until you could talk a good game about how people need to, be faithful and honor their vows and stay together and get through the hard times and carry that cross. But you're not really defending marriage until you defend it personally with someone that is suffering. And then you can decide, well, I really do hold that as a cherished teaching, a value. So I'm accusing myself too. I don't ever want anyone to think, oh, well, she's just lecturing at people. No. And I have enough people in my life who, have gone through either, terrible situations or, again, my own husband is an adult of divorce, I guess you could say, because his parents divorced after he was an adult and married. But, it's everywhere. So, but yeah, it is a very difficult book to read, but it's a very easy book to read. It's not difficult reading.
Yeah.
It's just emotionally difficult because you don't realize even the first chapter. I always say, I have some people who will say to me, well, I'm really glad my parents got divorced. Or there'll be someone who did divorce and say, well, I'm so glad. It was the best thing I ever did. And my children are thrilled that I got divorced. And then I always just challenge them. Okay, that might be true. I don't know your personal experience, but I would like you to maybe just, and I give this for free on PDF. Anybody can have it without buying it. Can you just read the first chapter and then tell me what you think? I just challenge you. And most people will not take me up on that challenge. I have discovered over the 7 or 8 years, the 2 or 3 people who have taken me up on it, I cannot tell you. Their responses, one woman came back and she was pretty flippant at first. And she came back and she said, just 2 words. She's like, I'm gutted. And that's how it hits you. And I can't even read it. I mean, it's terrible. I'm tearing up thinking about it. And I know, I didn't know 90% of these people. I had no idea who they were. And now I'm friendly with many of them. And so now when I read it, it really hits. But it hits even if you don't know them. And anyone who's, anyone who's been a child of divorce. I mean, I think it, anyway, it's brutal, but it's necessary. Because again, I was 50 years old before I had any idea of the walking wounded all around me. Most children of divorce don't know either because they aren't allowed to really talk about it. And I'll tell you one little anecdote and then I can let you guys talk. But I was on EWTN being interviewed about this book about 4 or 5 years ago. And a woman emailed me who was in her 60s. And she said, my parents have been divorced for over 50. I mean, they're dead now, but they were divorced 50 plus years ago when I was a girl. And until I saw that show, I never knew that anyone else felt like I did. And I'm thinking, how did this woman walk around for 5 decades in America and have no idea that anyone else felt this way? And the only thing I can say about that is that because we refuse to talk about it because the kids aren't supposed to talk about it. You're not even supposed to connect your pain and whatever relationship problems you're having and whatever depression you're having, whatever anger, young men have, whatever suicidal feelings, cutting, promiscuity. You're not supposed to connect any of that to your parents' divorce, because that would be what? You're happy because your parents are happy and it all worked out the way it should. So you're not even supposed to connect it, and that's what you're taught. And then if you do get that idea that, oh wait, maybe this has something to do with the shattering of my family and my identity, they don't want to hear that because it's too much for a parent to take in. Parents don't want to hurt their children; they really don't, and it's too much. And so they put the kid on medication, or send them to the therapist, or whatever they do. They're acting out, and they say, well, it's got to be you because it can't be us. We're well-adjusted adults who did the right thing. So anyway, it's a complicated issue, but it's not really that complicated when you break it down.
Yeah, and for people listening who might want to read the book, so it is how it's formatted, I think is really cool, because you can, and which was helpful for me when I was reading it, is it's so organized. I appreciate that.
All the OCD people out there, just know.
Yeah. No, I do love that. So there's how many stories would you say or how many people ended up?
So the people that ended up contributing, I had hundreds of people within the first few days who wanted to answer this questionnaire because they knew it would be anonymous, and they knew they wouldn't hurt their parents. Mm-hmm. Then they were ready to speak. But the people who actually got the questionnaire, it was very simple, 8 simple questions off the top of my head that I just wanted to know. Yeah. And the ones that were able to emotionally send that back to me, because many people just said, I can't fill it out. Can't do it. And but it ended up being 70. So there are 70 people, men, women, mostly women, because women tend to tell stories more. They want to talk about it more. They're more relational. Men are a little quieter about things. Yeah. But we got some pretty good guys in there telling their story. And people who had been very small or even infants when their parents divorced, children, we have a good number who were adults by the time their parents divorced. So that also, we had messy divorces, abusive situations. We had good divorces, happy divorces. We had everything. And some were Catholic, some weren't. And the same themes kept coming up no matter what the situation. And you can see that throughout your book, but and you can also follow along with, so say if you resonate with, like what you said, if my situation is a less messy divorce or things like that, you can follow that person by the number that you gave them throughout the different chapters if you really resonate with the story, which I thought was really cool that you can do. Yes, and I have at the end kind of a contributor demographic. So contributor number 1, how old was male or female? How old at the time of the divorce? What's the situation now? So there's a little biographical, just a tiny little line or two on each of the contributors so you know who you're dealing with. And then and I only messed up once. There is one number. So if somebody tries to follow this one paragraph because each answer has at the very end of their paragraph or their section of answering the question is their number. Mm-hmm. And so you can always go flip and look and see who that is and then follow it in the next question. So I was, speaking of a little OCD, I'm like, darn it, I got one number wrong and there's no way I can correct it because it's self-published and I don't know how to fix a PDF. So that's just how it is at this point. The title, Primal Loss. What made you come up with that? Yeah, I had to think long and hard. Titles to me are what's going to make someone read a book, or it could turn them off. So I'm like, what is this book about? What are we seeing here? And I realized, marriage was created in the garden. That was the very first human relational thing that God created, was a married couple. And so, we tend to think of even marriage as just being some romance between two people, but marriage was created to also bring forth children. That's a primary end of marriage here. So the children are a part of, and they have a right to, what God created for them, which is their married mom and dad. And so the more I started going through these stories, I started to realize this is not something, marriage is not it's not a political thing, a societal thing that came later as we became more civilized. This was the very first thing. And so when you lose that God gives you a natural right to, children have a natural right to their families, then you're losing something primal. Like that is the most primal thing, is who generated you, where'd you come from, this marriage, and the order of that's how it's supposed to be. So when things are rightly ordered, we find that things tend to flourish. And when things are disordered, and that's my big thing now is, order versus disorder. Why do things...
Yeah, we were just talking
Really?
about that.
Okay, good. That's
In the parking lot.
In the parking lot.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
great. That's great. Because it is. It's and St. Thomas Aquinas says that peace is the tranquility of order. So how do we have peace? Well, order in our souls, order in our families, order in our world, our church, everything. So when you lose something that primal that was meant for you, you are going to be disoriented. There's going to be something, something missing, something, dark things can come in. There's a shattering of your identity, your very identity as just a human being, and on the most primal level. So when you lose, so that is the loss of the family, the loss of your parents together, loving each other in a marriage. You lose yourself. You lose so much. And, I don't want to sound hopeless. Obviously, there are ways that God uses these crosses to make us holy. Of course, He wouldn't allow it otherwise. But the children, it's very different, I think, in the way the parents deal with it, because the parents, when they divorce, they can move on. They go on to their other romance. They can have a whole life over here, but the child cannot move on, because they're still two halves. They're part of. That's half of me. This is half of me. I had this identity. This was my family, and now they're tasked with straddling both these worlds, or trying to find a way to navigate two different separate worlds going in different directions that even the adults don't have to do anymore, because they're done.
Yeah.
So now you got the child doing it. Like they say, it's like taking the cross off the adult's shoulder and putting it on the shoulders of their children. And not just for a short time. I remember this one very devout Catholic lady. She was young, and she just decided she wasn't, I kid you not, she just decided she wasn't really attracted to her husband anymore. But she was very devout, and she even was a speaker on marriage, believe it or not. But she decided, well, I don't think I was ever really attracted to him. So she had like 3 little children, and she divorced him. And I'll never forget, she ended up, her 7-year-old son was weeping to her one night, like, I miss Daddy, I miss our family, whatever. And she said, oh, let's look at the pictures. We'll look at the photo album of the wedding and all that. And she went on social media, and she literally said, and I think that we came to a resolution. Like, he seems fine. And I'm thinking, you're delusional. Mm-hmm. You think because you said, look, oh, isn't it sad? Oh, let's mourn together for 10 minutes. And then, she was moving on and had another, a boyfriend. But you think that child's okay. Well, I can tell you from the stories that I've seen, it doesn't just suddenly go away. It might change. I mean, yeah, you have to adapt to life. You have to live, those who don't commit suicide, but that's another story. But you have to live, and so you adapt. But the problem is it gets more complicated as you get older. It doesn't go away. It just changes. Holidays become complicated once you grow up. Once you have your own children, you're navigating stepmothers and other grandchildren from the stepmother's first children, and how that interplays with you and your grandchildren, and your father who has to give more attention to his wife than to you and your children. And I mean, all the different ways, who do I text first about where am I going for Thanksgiving? What if I text this person first? Even things like that, as it's just so complicated, and it never goes away. Every happy event, right? So every baptism, every subsequent, marriage, every graduation, all these different events that should be happy, not the child has to think, okay, who do I sit with?
Yeah.
What if that person shows up with the new wife? What if this happens here? And it's never a joyful experience. It's a stressful experience.
It's like a burden that we've now endured on ourselves, because everything you're saying, I'm like, yep. Like, you can never truly enjoy something for yourself because you're constantly thinking, am I making them uncomfortable?
It's about that. It really is. It does become about the people who put this on you in the first place.
Yeah.
And they don't want to think about it because, again, they don't want to you don't want to know that you've hurt your children so badly that it has affected their entire lives, and it could affect their own marriages, and it could affect their grandchildren. They don't want to think that. I liken it in a bit to abortion, believe it or not. There are many parallels. Oh, okay, this child, that didn't work out. This child is not the right one, but we're going to get free, and we're going to try again. We're going to have another, shot at it, and everything's going to be okay. But like the post-abortive mother who has not yet come to grips with what happened, the same thing with a lot of people who have, and I'm talking about, there are many people who do not want to be divorced. They're divorced against their will. So I'm not talking about the abandoned spouse. What can you do? There's almost nothing you can do. But the one who made a decision like, yeah, this has to happen, and yeah, I'm going to leave and whatever. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's both. But if they really had to face what damage was done, it's almost too much to take. Just like a woman who, has to face what she's done in an abortion. You don't want to go there. It's too dark. It's just too much. So it's difficult. So they have to be like, well, everything's fine, all these events and stuff. And then they can maybe act selfishly, be like, well, keep me away from that person or that person. But you're kind of, the child is still in charge of making sure everybody's happy, or, it is a great burden that should not be there. I can tell you, as a child from an intact family, I don't even understand what that's like. It never occurred to me. That's why I feel a little bit, I don't want to say, for lack of a better word, I feel slimed by having touched this subject, because I was pristine on this. I didn't think about it. I didn't care. Every baptism I went to or wedding, I was happy, and when my dad died, we were the intact units saying goodbye. It wasn't what are we going to do? It's that burden wasn't there. So I liked it. I have to tell you, it's very free. It's really nice. And then learning what people are going through every single day, it's actually unthinkable. I don't know how people do function. And then it makes me realize, well, that's why we're so messed up in this society, because everything starts with the family. And if you have all these things that you're trying to navigate, and if you don't have your faith, on top of that, if people don't have their faith, no wonder everyone's a mess.
Yeah. There's no navigation system. There's no way to find your way home, and there's no way to find where you need to be at that point in your life as an adult or as a teen. You really are lost without faith. There is, without Jesus at the center.
Yeah.
Then you really will struggle. I know I have in my own personal life. So I'm not preaching. I'm just sharing. Even as an older man now, and a grandfather and a father, I look back and realize that some of the things that I did or didn't do came because of this identity crisis, trying to find myself. And a person is already, yourself included, right? Trying to find yourself and having your parents' marriage intact is one thing you didn't have to worry about. But still, as a normal person, using air quotes, you're still struggling to find your purpose and your way. And without faith and without the primal gift of family and life, all those things that are given to us that by God's design, when they're missing, we have a tendency to keep moving on. And as you were speaking right now, I just kept thinking of how we don't want to talk about the things that hurt us, because we have replaced the getting over it instead of, and not talking about it. And as the more time goes by, the time heals all things. But I think of it as a wound that has a scab that's not, that wound hasn't been cleaned out. it'll still dry. It'll still dry, but it'll be ugly. It'll be infected, and it'll hurt. And that scab you have is not healing. It's just dried. And it's not until you go in and get that scraped out. I hate this analogy, but it's so gross. But we don't want to talk about those things. No, I'm fine. Mm-hmm. Right, I'm fine. Don't want to talk about it. Don't go there. I went through this with my wife early on. We were dating, and she'd ask, and I'm like, just leave it alone. It's good. I'm fine. And then she'd ask again as we had children, and she says, "You sure?" I'm like, leave it alone. I'm good. But I think I was as a man, I was a scared little boy that I found a way to fix and live in the good. And I did have a good upbringing. But as I process life, I realize that even to this day, there are repercussions from my parents not being, my biological father and mother being together in my life from day one. And yeah. So if my family's listening, I mean, it's all love, but it's funny as we're talking. I text the girls. I say, "Are we talking about our own relationships?" Because,
Yeah,
it's true. There's in fact, when you talk about wounds, it's a good analogy, because one of the best apostolates that came up kind of right around the time I was, editing Primal Loss is called Life-Giving Wounds. And lifegivingwounds.org, they are focused only on that, on the adult children of divorce and how to help them heal. Because, and the man who founded it, Dan Miola, is a child of divorce. But it is, we can turn these wounds into something that are similar to Christ's wounds, that it can be salvific, it can be wonderful, but you first have to identify the wound and the fact that it's there. And so what I like to say, people say, well, what can we do? Like, people from intact family, what can we do? I don't know how to help anyone. Yeah. And the first thing you can do is, acknowledge that there was an injustice done to this child. Like, I when I started this whole thing, this journey, I challenged people to ask, because I talked to a lot of adult children of divorce, and they said, well, no one actually asked me how I felt about this whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was always, how's your mom doing?
Yes. How's your dad? Mom doing? Exactly. How's your dad? Yeah. And you might get a therapist who could help you deal or cope with some emotions, but they never ask the direct question, how do you feel about what happened to your family? And so when enough people started telling me that nobody ever asked that question, even their friends, I challenged people online. I said, go ask a coworker who's a child of divorce, ask them that question. And I got back that they would say, well, nobody ever asked me that before, and that is something like, what? I mean, that is that's the base injustice here, is that you were denied something that was your natural right, that God gave you, that God wanted you to have, even if there was never a marriage. But I mean, God wanted you to have a certain structure, a certain way to come into the world. And it was denied you for whatever reason. And that was an injustice. And once you see, this is the opposite of gaslighting, because once you say that this happened to you and it was wrong, either someone sinned or two people sinned, but somebody's sin got you in this place. And it could be, we're not talking about death, because death, nobody can control leaving a family through dying. But someone's sin caused this. Therefore, there was an injustice against you, the child. You were innocent. You didn't have anything to do with what just happened to your family. So that baseline understanding and acknowledgement from people, especially if it's a parent that comes back later and says, I'm so sorry, this was wrong. This was an injustice to you, the children. That goes so far towards healing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That one little line, that saves, I don't know how much money in therapy, right there. No, literally. And I've had therapists actually say, I hand this to my client and they're like, oh, this took a huge burden off, yeah. Or I had one, you guys will like this, I think. There was a woman who read the book, and she was probably in her 70s or 80s. And she said, I read this book and I saw myself in I was the one who left my husband. And I saw like my children as in one particular man. I saw him about the same age. And she said, I've never thought about apologizing to him. So she said she literally sat her son down. He was like, at this point, like 35. And she just said, with no excuses, I would say, do not make excuses. I know you had many reasons why you may have had to, whatever. Just no excuses. Just say you're sorry. And she sat him down. And to his surprise, she said, I want to apologize for leaving your father 30 years ago, whatever. And she said, I did this to our family. I'm sorry. And I wish I hadn't done it. And it's cost you a lot and all this. She said his entire countenance and his shoulders, everything, it looked like this huge burden had just been lifted off of him. And he kind of just said, oh, thank you. And you could tell, like, everything changed. She said, I felt everything had changed. And then she said, and next I have to go to my daughter. And so it was just so powerful. And I say that to people at the beginning of the book. I'm like, this book is for everyone. It's not just for the adult children of divorce. It's not just for people like me who don't know that this is happening. I'm, from an intact family, but it's for pastors, it's for therapists, and it's also for the people who have left. Because say you're sorry. And then you have this baseline where you can start healing because you've not been gaslit, right? So, I mean, as long as you're not still making the kids feel crazy, then they can say, okay, yes, there was an injustice. Now I understand. Now things are ordered. Now I see that there was a disorder where, but people are acknowledging that actually, I'm not crazy. It actually did happen. It's something bad happened to me. So,
the power of apology. Wow.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's very powerful.
Yeah, the power of apology. And I'm a 60-year-old father of 3, grandfather of 7. I used to say, tell my wife that I can apologize easily, more easily than she can, but teasing because I used to say because I mess up so much, I have to apologize to people all the time, and I realize that that's how I fix relationships. Duh, But I just recently apologized to my sons. I mean, it was in the instant, but I don't want to lose that relationship. And if it requires me, and so I'm speaking to all of my peers as parents of children, don't be afraid to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I said. I'm sorry for what I did. It's free. It's freeing. It's what love will call us to. And I would just offer this last little caveat of apologize without an excuse.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm sorry, but it was horrible. You don't know the things. Like, just I'm sorry.
Yes. And that's wise, whether or not you are someone who divorced, someone and you have to talk to your kids like that. Or like you said, like us. I mean, I'm with you. It's kind of a tangent, but yes, you apologize to your children when you were wrong. That is, I've lived the same way, which is, gosh, I'm sorry. Now that I'm an older parent, especially, I'm like, oh gosh, I didn't know what I was doing, at first. And I'm really sorry that this or that happened. And
what are you trying to save? You're trying to save your pride from your children?
Right.
From your spouse? Like, it's, anyway.
Yeah.
No, when you talk about healing and forgiveness, so I hadn't cracked open this book, and I cracked it open because I knew we were meeting with you, but I had read it so many years ago, and I told David recently, we were talking about, and I sat with what you said, because I had told him I put it down because it is a really heavy read, and it was so fresh for me when I was reading this book.
Sorry.
That I did stop. I did stop reading it. And I chalked it off to, like, I was one of the easier divorces that like, my family is very civil. They're very comfortable with each other. I could tell you that I have a good dynamic with my family. But yeah, I had to stop reading it. And then David's like, is that really like why you stopped reading it though? Like I felt like I couldn't relate to a lot of the stories because mine was the best case scenario that there could be for a family or for a child of divorce. So when I cracked it back open again, and reading all the past things that I had highlighted and those things, I was able to realize, because since then, like I have gotten an apology. I was able to, I do forgive my parents for all of that, but that doesn't dismiss the fact that it does change like who you are as a person.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really sat and thought about that in a long time.
That is, thank you. There's a particular woman in the book, and she's public. Her name is Jen Cox. Actually, she actually now works for Life Giving Wounds. She helps others, but she's one in the book that said it was such an easy divorce. It was such a friendly divorce. She said, my parents did everything right. They did everything they were supposed to do for me. They cooperated with each other beautifully. And she's the one, I don't know if we've got to this point where she said, she was 4 or 5 and her sister who was older said something like, or her parents or someone, I think it was her mom actually came to her and said something like, we're getting a divorce or something. She didn't know what that even meant. So she went to her friend and she said, she kind of got really spunky. She said, we're getting a divorce. We're getting a divorce. Like wow. She didn't even know what that meant. And so she went through her whole life until her early 30s, believing things had gone really well. Like that her life was good. Everything was great. Yet she had all this anxiety. She didn't know where it was coming from. She didn't know what was happening. And
I did read hers. Yeah.
You did read hers, yes. She's been on some podcasts too. She's great. And she finally said, then I realized how much this had affected me when I didn't even know it.
Yeah. And that's okay. Like, I think that was something that was good for me to hear, is that, like, I don't blame anybody. I'm not upset at anyone, but it has allowed me to now start this point where I can heal and recognize, like, where that's coming from. Where, like, there's these moments where I'm like, why am I like this? Like, this doesn't make any sense. I wasn't always like this. And when you can pinpoint and you can start to work on and maneuver, like, okay, like, let's work on that. Yeah. But I think coming from that place of, like, yes, of forgiveness and then leading to healing, there was a part in the book that was likened it to being an addict or suffering from, like, alcohol abuse and things like that, and that you're just constantly in recovery. So it's not that didn't go away. It's you're constantly recovering from that, and that's okay. Like, you're working on that continuously.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I'm similar. Like, my parents divorced when I was 2 years old. And unfortunately, it wasn't, like, good co-parenting. They, to this day, like, they still don't get along very well. But since it happened to me since I was young, growing up with that confusion of belonging and why am I not enough? Like, why wasn't, because they got married to the church. So just seeing now that I'm in ministry, like, like, why couldn't they fight? Like, it's all the whys, and the whys don't have answers to them, So, like, even to like, now that I'm 22, like, I'm still in this, like, why? And when I cracked open the book, because David also gave it to me, and I was like, what is this? 60, she said, or I didn't know, I didn't read who's who, he or she. But I'm going to quote it. He or she said, the broken family is a reminder that a parent had a choice. The child doesn't have a choice, though, and this is a perpetual source of confusion, pain, and complication where peace, joy, love, and simplicity should have been the norm. And they go on to say, lastly, but certainly not least, my adult eyes see how loving, compassionate, and supportive my friends and even strangers are to their children. Even now, I wonder why I wasn't special enough to elicit the same love, compassion, or support from my own parents. It's always a question the child asks himself, why wasn't I enough? It's more confusing as an adult, though, because I have the clarity that maturity and reason bring. I can clearly see that nothing could justify doing what my parents did to me. And there's, like, this sense of, like I didn't deserve that. Because when you were talking about when the kid always feels like this place, if I have to pick, like, that's every single time with anything. Like, even thinking about my future, like, if, I'm in a relationship right now and if we're getting called to get married, like, that's something I'm thinking about, like, oh, like, my parents coming back together and our families combining. And it's like, dang, like, I can't even, like, enjoy that. Because it's this constant, like, but what if? Like, what if they do run through each other? My step-parents, like, so, like, as we're sharing this, I'm like, dang, like, and, it's still a healing process for me. And I don't think it's ever going to be, like, a point where I'm like, yeah, like, I'm okay. Like even now that in my adult years, like I have been digging deep to figure out, like, again, like, why am I the way that I am? Because a lot of things have been brought to the light of other people pointing it out to me, like, oh, you're more like this or you're like that. And I'm just like, I don't know, like, I'm figuring that out.
You probably have a question too of, what would I have been like if this hadn't happened? Like, is this a result of what happened, or is this just me? Or, you have all those questions. And I think it is like, you can liken it to an amputation where, sure, you're going to get used to living without an arm.
Yeah.
As you get older and this is how I function. Everybody else has 2 arms. I have 1 arm. How do you function? Well, you have to make adjustments. But you're never going to have that arm. You're always going to be working through the fact that you don't have a limb, and other people do, or you used to. So it's a permanent.
Yeah.
It's a permanent thing that you're going to be living with, and until it's healed in heaven,
And I would say, like, it definitely has changed the dynamic with my relationship with them and even my siblings. I have my sibling, my older brother, we share the same parents. His experience compared to mine is different. Like, that was so interesting to me. Like, when we sit down and talk about these things, like, for him, it's just like, well, he's older, so he remembers a lot more. But for him, it's just like, it is what it is. I'm like, but like, shouldn't you care a little bit? And he's just like, no. So it's different. It's interesting to see people's different reactions to, like, their parents' divorce. And that's something that even now I'm like, does that change? Like, where does that conversation start? How can someone dig in and, like, really, it's not a, like, I'm fine mentality, but it's like, no, something happened to you. Let's talk about it.
Right. And some people aren't ready to talk about it, and some people aren't even aware that a lot of what they're dealing with is because of the divorce of their parents. They're not even, like, again, they're not told that that's even possible, So, yeah, we have a lot of contributors to the book, again, that I've gotten to know, and, we talk a lot, and some of them can't talk to their siblings at all. Some of them, are watching their siblings crash and burn in a million different ways, but they are in denial that it has anything to do with the shattering of their foundation, the loss of their identity. So it is very individual. I had a friend, she's actually she's a big fan of Primal Loss. She's a therapist. She's a marriage and family therapist, and she's also a professor back east in Virginia, Dr. Christine Bacon. She has a podcast too, Breakfast with Bacon. Yeah, she's great. She's really great. And she actually gave her secular students at this college that she teaches at, she gave them an assignment, which was to take the book and find a passage in the book that they thought was interesting, someone's answer, and then they were to find a child of divorce, an adult child of divorce, and ask that person how they felt about it.
Wow.
And so what was interesting, she let me kind of see the results. And what I thought was fascinating was that the older the child of divorce that the person found to ask about, the more they were able to connect the dots. Like one young lady went to her mom, who was in her 50s, and her mom was a child of divorce. And the mother was giving these really, insightful answers, like, yes, this is what happened to me. This is why it affected my life, or, whatever. But that it seemed like the younger they were, like if they went to a peer that was 20, someone on campus or whatever, almost always those people were like, oh, yeah, no, that did not affect me. In fact, I'm really glad they got divorced. And but then they would say things like, I'm just really lonely, but my loneliness or my anxiety, has nothing to do with the divorce. But then they would go on and say why, how they felt just isolated in a world of people, but they feel like I'm just all alone, and they don't want to have a family of their own, or, they're scared to, commit, or things like that. And it's like, you haven't put 2 and 2 together yet. Like you haven't gotten there yet. And my friend Leanne Abel, who works with a lot of adult children of divorce, she's kind of my partner in crime. She's local, and she's wonderful, but she's a child of several divorces, and she's now, she'll be 60 this year, I think. And she calls it the thawing out phase. She says, first when she brings people into these different groups, she has to talk, how to navigate the holidays, how to forgive your parents, how to live the 4th commandment is huge, huge. And she said, you get the new ones coming in who are just realizing, wait a minute, something, maybe this was affecting me all my life. And she calls it the thawing out phase. So she's like, well, this person might not be thawed out yet, and this one might not be thawed out yet. But then once you thaw, you understand what's going on. Then you can, again, you can place it. You can think in an ordered way what happened. Oh, okay, that's great. Yeah, this is terrible. It happened to me. I don't need to hate my parents. I am a Christian. I can also find a way. This cross was given to me, and I can find a way to become a saint through this cross. So there's ways to look at everything, and we look at it through a Catholic lens. We look at it through reason. We look at it through love, forgiveness, all of that. But it can be the most beautiful thing. But it has to be understood first that this was a problem.
Yeah.
You can't just say it wasn't a problem. So,
yeah, I think just talking about it is a good beginning for anyone, right? And maybe find those people that you feel safe, your siblings, and you might get that. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to go there. Or talk to your friends now and your family that would understand. Try to find someone to talk to about it, so you can talk through it. Reach out to your priest.
And I'll give, for young people, if someone is listening who's a teen or young adult, my friend Joey Pontarelli also started an apostolate called restoredministry.com, and that's for teens and young adults who are experiencing their parents' separation or divorce. And he gives podcasts, and I've been on his podcast there, and he's got a book called It's Not Your Fault that I helped to edit. And so he's great, nice. Too. So he's a Steubenville grad and has a family of his own now, but young guy, a great guy. So there are people who are finally ready to listen, and they know what you've been through. They understand it, and they're Catholic. Their lens is very much truth and Catholicism, and right, God's created order. So that's another good resource.
Yeah, I think just in our own conversations, myself and Delilah and Esme, we've sat there and just in our own little stories, can relate to. We start to read something in the book, and I'm trying to remember. I think it was an 8-year-old girl said that when her parents were getting a divorce, her dad was given the opportunity to tell her, and he sat her down. He told her that mommy and daddy were getting a divorce, and she too wasn't really sure what that meant. And then they sent her to school.
Yes. Oh gosh. Yes.
She was 8.
Yes.
8 years old.
And she was an only child.
Ah.
And I know this woman now. I didn't know her at the time, but I'm good friends with her now. She doesn't live in Arizona, but she's the one, when she answered these questions. I mean, that was one of the ones that was so gut-wrenching. There are a few where you just want to cry. I mean, I don't know. If your children are divorced, you may want to cry all of them, but there are a few for me that was just like those things, the one where there's a few stories that just kill me. But so hers is one, because she kept asking the question, why, Leila? Why? Why did they think that was okay? Why did they send me to school after telling me that they were getting a divorce, and then I'm sent to school? And she's like, I'm alone. I have no one. And then, she's all of a sudden, why is this girl, then she goes on to junior high and high school, why is this girl suddenly gained 40 pounds? Why is she the most promiscuous girl in school? Why is she cutting? Why is she doing all this? And, why can't I spend my Christmas with my father because he has a new wife or girlfriend? Why is my mom she doesn't want to see me? Why am I spending my time alone? I have no one. She said that several times. She's like, I have no one, Leila. I had no one. And all this came out for her. I think the book was very healing for her. I mean, very healing for her, because she
Praise
really,
God.
yes. And she's a wonderful Catholic. She is married with several children, successful marriage, happy life, but it's still, she needed to get this out. Like, I don't think anyone ever cared or asked her. And there was so much there. And that one really hurt, because she really just kept saying, I was a child. How did they think they could do this to me? Or where was I going to go? What was I going to do? So she kept appealing to me. Even in the book, I kept that in there, where she's like, Leila, what were they thinking? And I kept all that in there, because I thought, this is emotion. This is someone who's no one's ever acknowledged this wound and this huge rupture in her soul.
Yeah. Esme tells and I'm just gonna nudge her, and you can edit it if you need to. Okay. Esme tells a story of being picked up when they moved one time, and they moved into a house in Litchfield Park. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'll let her tell the story.
Wait, what? Which one?
About how you guys were living, I guess, in a trailer, and then you moved in. They picked you up from school, and they told you you were moving.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, because
2-story house.
Yeah. So I used to live in the East Valley in Tempe because I was born in Mesa. So when I came, whole story. So I lived with my mom, and then my dad came back from North Carolina, picked us up, and basically we started living with my dad when I entered 3rd grade. So we lived in an apartment, and then something happened. I don't know why, but we were there for like 6 months. Then we moved into a trailer, and this was all in Tempe. And I was going to a school. I forgot what it's called, but it's in Tempe. And I remember this day like it was yesterday because we were watching Matilda, and we were just watching the movie. And I just hear on the intercom like, "Oh, Esmeralda, Avila, like, come to the office. It's your last day." And so I'm like, saying bye to my friends because I didn't understand like my last day. Like I was like, okay, like, like last day probably here, like in this class, my moving classes. And so like I'm saying all bye to my friends. I'm like, I'll see you tomorrow, And then we drive for like 40 minutes. And then we end up at this 2-story house. And my dad's girlfriend at the time, she had picked us up, and we just met my dad over there. And yeah, my dad was just like, yeah, we're living here now. The next day I started school at my new school.
So she said she didn't care because she had a 2-story house.
I trade off.
We went from a trailer to a 2-story house, but like even that transition, I was like, what? Like it just happened so fast that I didn't have time to process. Like I just lost like my friends, like I had to make new friends.
Yeah, the next day.
Yeah,
maybe.
New teachers, a new environment, and yeah, it was just quick. So
well, and if it's that can be really traumatizing because if you're someone in the book said it's one thing if your intact family, your parents move. Okay, you're moving. Yeah. Maybe they move a lot. But he said that's still home because all the same Christmas decorations are going to go up, and you're going to have the same dinners, and you're going to smell the same smells that come from the kitchen, and it's all still home. But once you break the family, there's no home anymore. Yeah. There's no home to go back to. There's nothing.
Yeah.
So, the life of someone who just moves a lot is very different from someone who's moving because of a broken family.
Yeah. I moved a lot. Mm-hmm. From my mom to my dad, even living with my grandparents too. It was just a lot of moving. So 3rd grade though, that was it. Yeah, until middle school though, but that was fine because I didn't like my middle school, so that was fine.
So it was okay to move.
Yeah.
Which brings us to back to the point that that kids are resilient, right? They're little, they're small, they'll grow, they'll get over it. It'll be better. 2-story house, whatever whatever parents are giving to their kids to make up for the hurt and the pain that they've caused them through the breakup of their marriage. Just from the forward of the book, and I encourage you to grab a copy. The forward reads that the divorce ideology is one of the linchpins of the sexual revolution. Kids are resilient. Parents who don't get along do their kids no favor by staying married. Everyone has a right to be happy, which means the right to change sex partners more or less at will. TV sitcoms, movies, academic studies, public policies, styles sections of newspapers, women's magazines, therapists, and even some clergy claim divorce is harmless to children and beneficial to adults. Lies. I mean, just
so many lies
so
of the
many
devil.
Lies.
So the chapter, the question, each question that I ask is a chapter. So one of the questions I asked is, what do you want to say to people when they say children are resilient? And I can tell you that chapter, I had to do the most bleeping out and editing of swear words. Yeah. People were very forthcoming in how they think that's a bunch of BS, basically. I mean, they were not happy because that is the line that's fed to them. And some people would say things like, Well, yeah. I mean, a rubber trash can is resilient. You can run it over, 100 times and it'll kind of keep bouncing back. But, is that what we are? Or somebody who's been in a war or somebody who's lost a limb, you can learn to live with things that are traumatic and horrific, but that doesn't mean you put it on someone to begin with and say, well, you're resilient, so it'll be okay. And then this is so interesting, just this morning. So I have a text thread with about 8 of my friends from Primal Loss. It's funny because for a long time there was a Facebook group, and 40 or 50 of them were in this group, and they allowed me in because I was like the honorary member because I kind of brought them all together through the book. But I still have a text thread with a few of them, and every day we're in touch every day. I mean, they're funny. They love each other. I mean, some of them even fly into Phoenix and have reunion. We have they found a whole group of amazing friends, and so just today someone said she's kind of worried about her own situation of, I hope my kids don't end up, she has a good marriage, but she's like, I worry, like, who are they going to marry? What's going to happen? And there's still a lot of anxiety about your own children and such. But and then someone else piped in and said, children are resilient, because they kind of laugh about that. And then someone else piped in and said, well, yeah, I asked my therapist that once when my therapist said, well, children are resilient. And I asked her, well, then how come so many people are in therapy? And literally, I guess the therapist stopped and really thought about that and started to look at things a little bit differently. So it's like, maybe that's why she has so many clients, Yeah. So, but anyway, it was a rough chapter. That one is
that's frustrating to hear. Like, okay. I didn't ask for it though. Like,
right.
Yeah.
Where else would we say that? Like, what if somebody's a rape victim? God forbid. Something would just say, rape victims are resilient. Don't worry about it. We're not going to talk about it. You just go along your life. It's like, huh? I mean, that doesn't seem right. And we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't silence like an abuse victim, like domestic violence. We can talk about that now. And we talk about you're a victim. But we're going to make sure you survive this, and it's going to be okay. And we're going to tell you how to live well. And we don't brush that under the rug anymore. But you cannot speak if you are a child of divorce. You're not allowed. I cannot tell you. There was one lady on Facebook years ago who was studying to be a therapist, and this book had just come out, and somebody posted it, and this lady came in, and there's a lot of hostility, which is just, you have to wonder, what's the hostility of giving someone a voice? I mean, you give everyone a voice who is, claiming victim status or has gone through a trauma. We're all about that, right? And yet if it's a child of divorce, you need to be quiet. And what about abuse and this and that? And we can get into that too if you'd like. But the one lady who was going to be a therapist said, this book should not be allowed to be published. And I'm thinking, you're going to be a therapist? And these people, they're not even like, we're so silent on this issue because always it's about, happy co-parents, and parents can be, and look at this, and you're at the new wedding, and look, she's a flower girl, and isn't this fun? They're all happy. You get this one book that's self-published by some housewife in Phoenix, tiny thing, and it's just got just a little peep from some children of divorce who just barely are gonna crack this monolith of not being able to talk about it. Just a little tiny book, and all of a sudden they can't speak. Like, how dare you? How dare you? It's like, wait a second. Literally, there's so many voices, but ours is not allowed. And that was the shocking thing. And it's funny, they even have the people who are contributors now, because that's still their wound. So I say, well, I think God gave me this because I can take the slings and arrows because it's not my wound. So people attack me. But if these people, they still don't want to be public, a lot of them, they're like, I don't want to be attacked because I can't take it. Like, I'm just getting over this. I'm just starting to heal. I don't want to be attacked by 100 strangers on the internet. But they have this thing behind the scenes where it's like, I'll say something or I'll put an article out about how divorce harms children. And they will say to me, all right, 3, 2, 1. They're waiting for the, what about abuse? What about abuse? What, you want women killed? You want, and it never fails. And it's kind of like one of them wrote, who actually came from a very abusive situation. One of them wrote, not in the book, but in a Catholic Answers article, that's like putting the mute button on the pain of the children of divorce. It's kind of like when they say the exceptions for abortion, like, okay, really they're for all abortion, but they'll say, well, what about the 10-year-old who was raped by her father? And that's just a way to put a mute button on the discussion of abortion and the harm that abortion does. And the same thing with what about abuse? It's like, well, if we can just immediately say that, then we can shut down the whole discussion. And as this woman was actually in a horrifically abusive situation in a custody battle and all these different things, she said, I resent that because even with all that going on, I know the harm of my broken family. And I resent that you use people like me in my situation to put the mute button and silence everyone about divorce, that we can't talk about it. So it is kind of disingenuous and is a very intellectually dishonest, but that's what people do when they're trying to cover their conscience or trying to, change the subject.
And what can we do? I like how David brought up that forward in the book, because I think we have to figure out, like, how do we even get to the point of working on our families and relationships and forming healthy marriages. But I think you have to recognize, like, where did this even come from? Like, how did this even become a thing like that we're talking about in our office alone? None of us come from an intact family. So how did we get to this point where there's so many broken marriages, there's so many divorces, when before the 60s, I would say that wasn't the case.
Yeah, and if I can, and that you could probably speak more on this because of the sexual revolution, what I was sharing with them of the 60s, it was really I was looking it up, it's Christopher West and the Good News About Sex and Marriage. My parents had this book on their bookcase, and I thought it was like a sex book. Shout out that I peeped the book years ago when I was young. But Christopher West speaks about when the birth control pill came on the scene, the sexual revolution skyrocketed, because prior to the birth control pill, people would shy away from having extramarital affairs because of pregnancy.
Yes.
And then STDs. So you didn't want to get someone pregnant, and you didn't want to contract an STD. Well, the birth control pill took care of, someone getting pregnant, but we know STDs to this day. But what happened from there is the pill also didn't take away the dishonesty and the deceit of extramarital affairs, and so these marriages deteriorated, and so we saw a lot of separation and divorce, and the effects of what we've been talking about for these last few minutes of the effects on the children that are now grandparents. That's me.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a product of that sexual revolution, and I'm a grandparent now. And so when I sit in youth ministry and I try to talk to these kids about self-diagnosing themselves with anxiety and depression, you know what? They're probably right, because the generational cycles of dysfunction, they've arrived, and the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren of the sexual revolution are sitting here today.
Yes. And that's where the brilliance of the church comes in, because if you, which I never did before, if you look at the section in the Catechism on divorce, the language used is catastrophic. I mean, it talks about children traumatized by their parents' divorce. I mean, that's a pretty heavy word for an academic catechism, right? Mm-hmm. Traumatized, and the abandoned spouse also. It speaks of divorce as a contagion. That's the word they use. It speaks of divorce as a plague on society. I mean, think of these images. It says it introduces disorder into society, into families. We see when it happens in a parish, it introduces, people taking sides in a parish, and then, there's so much destruction. It reminds me of the parable, where someone in the middle of the night came and sowed all this bad seed. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, here we are. But, and then you add on to that, no fault divorce was probably one of the worst things ever, because all of a sudden anybody who was just unhappy could break a contract and then they could be in the wrong. Can you imagine if we had any other kind of contract law where you're like, oh, I don't feel like paying my car lease anymore. I'm just going to go 100% of the time I'm going to win, because that's what no fault divorce is. It doesn't matter who's in the wrong. Whoever wants a divorce will get it. So that's just this greased exit ramp, for suffering. And then you've got nobody really believes in marriage. Well, marriage, I mean, that requires restraint and forgiveness and chastity and all these different things that we don't want anymore. And then divorce means you get to go find a new romance. It's so fun. It's so shiny. It's so great. It's like this temptation to go off, and nobody's against it. Certainly not, not Hollywood, not anything influencing our children or, and we were just told whatever feels good, basically if it feels good, do it. And, the consequences, we're not going to think about that, because it's got to be good. It's got to be good if I'm happy, if I'm feeling good. So anyway, it's so pervasive on so many levels. But yeah, absolutely. The birth control pill made it so that, affairs are easy. Once that happens, anybody could start to like someone else. You can. I mean, it's safe now. And you're not tasked with this difficulty of working through. It could take years to work through a problem in a marriage. Mm-hmm. It could take a long time. That's why I included chapter 10, because after all this kind of dark, it's a little depressing. Although there's a section about faith too, like how did your faith help you? And, but you get to a section where I just basically said, I need to have something light in here. So I recruited other people who had either their own parents had gotten over a difficult marriage and came back together, or they themselves had redeemed their marriage. And so that's like a chapter of hope. And it really does say, gosh, it could take a while. It could take a long time to forgive a spouse for something egregious, or it could take a while just to learn to communicate better and remember why you married them in the first place. But the point is that we're Christians, and we know that redemption is possible. If we are not a people of redemption, then we are nothing. What are we? So, so that chapter hopefully, gave some lightness to some hope. Some people don't get to that point because it's like they drop the book before they get there. But
I haven't gotten there yet.
It's a good one. Some of the contributors have never read it. So I have contributors who will say, I got it in the mail and I can't open the envelope. Like it's almost like a kryptonite. I mean, they can't even go near it. Yeah. And then some other people read through, almost like, glutton for punishment, read it 3-4 times, But so it's interesting how people, even who contributed, take it. And the interesting thing, too, I thought you guys might find this interesting, that some people were reading it and they'd get to a paragraph and they'd say, oh, this is my paragraph. And then they'd get to the number at the end of the paragraph, and it's like, it's not you. Mm-hmm. It's somebody else that had the exact same. Mm-hmm. So similar a sentiment that you actually thought it was yours. Yeah. So, it's been fascinating to see the responses to the book, even by the contributors.
When I get an opportunity to speak to the parents at the parish, I get asked quite a bit to talk about on the topic of marriage. I usually will start off and I'll talk to the dads and I'll ask them, do you love your children? And they're like, yeah, of course. Well, would you die for them? Yes, of course. Well, here's the whole gist of this next 20 minutes is, if you want to love your children, love their mother. And for mothers, love their fathers. That if you really do want to love your children, start there.
Amen. And that's a variation on that is, you love your children enough to die for them. No, yes. But do you love them enough to live for them and order your life for them? And that's where people get, they'll do the quick bullet, or throw yourself in front of a train. But are you going to live in an unhappy marriage with a woman who's terrible to you, or, someone who complains all the time, or a man who is, not meeting your emotional needs? Are you going to live with that for 50 years? Well, yeah. If you're going to live for your children's and God's plan, you are. And then through your sanctity, because that's more along the lines of the book that followed up, because the Bishop Olmsted really loved this book. He actually put a blurb on it, and he gave it to a lot of the seminarians and such. And Father Paul Sullivan also, he said, I need a whole book of chapter 10. I need, as a priest, I need these impossible marriages redeemed, which is, that's what I ended up, I'm using that term now, but I had to think of that one too. Like, what do I call this one? But it really, what I found in those stories, with chapter 10 in Primal Loss and then Impossible Marriages Redeemed, is that when a person, even in a horrific marriage, and we're talking adultery, addiction, we're talking, just terrible things, because I used the worst examples, which proves that anybody who's in a lesser situation can certainly figure out a way to stay married. And even if you have to separate for a time, I mean, that's another thing. Church allows separation in cases of, canon law says, moral or physical danger and unrepentant adultery. But canon law also says when those things are out of the way and they've been resolved, if they ever get resolved, you must, in all cases, return to conjugal living. So that's canon law. But okay. So, but basically, these people who were in these terrible marriages, they started to stop focusing. They stopped focusing on the sins of their spouse. And they started clinging to, prayer, the rosary, God, adoration, going, to mass regularly or daily. And then they started to notice that they changed, their attitude towards their spouse changed. And then eventually, a lot of these spouses changed completely. So
Imagine
God's
that.
grace, yeah. I mean, isn't it crazy? You start to be holy, you start to be virtuous, you start to love God and your spouse more, and you can change a terrible, terrible situation into something that is redeemed, and it is beautiful to watch. So, all is not lost. Everybody thinks just because I'm suffering badly right now. That's why my subtitle of the second book is They Didn't End the Story in the Middle. How do we know what God has for us if we end the story in the middle? It's just like an abortion, right? Again, I go back to, this is like marital abortion. You end the life of the marriage or you end the baby, you don't know what God had in store. You have no idea. Yeah, we know you're suffering now, but that's not the end of the story.
I'm like, no words.
I know. But that does come because you mentioned separation and annulment. Mm-hmm. How does one for my parents, for example, they're in that process still. So what are your thoughts on annulments and the Catholic Church and how they can navigate that, with you mentioning that marriages can be redeemed, is an annulment the first answer? And what is an annulment? Yeah, what is an annulment? Yeah.
Right. So annulment is not Catholic divorce. What annulment is, and we've always had it, is an investigation. Basically, it's a court case. It's a fact-finding, juridical tribunal court case to see the facts of the actual moment, the time of the marriage, at the exchange of vows, was everything in place that needed to be in place. Now, if there was an impediment, then that marriage never actually took place, even though it looked like it did. Mm-hmm. And then that person would be free to marry or free to convalidate and get married to the person that they thought they were married. Because no one ever talks about that part. It's like you can actually, if you really think there's an impediment, you can fix that. Mm-hmm. My thoughts on annulment, I think I have the same thoughts. I like to align my thoughts with JP2 and Pope Benedict, who had a lot to say about issues in America with tribunals and how many annulments were coming through the tribunals. There's a lot on that. I intend to write a lot more on that. I have good friends in many of the tribunals that have helped me understand the situation, because some of them have great concerns about how America is dealing with annulments. I've started to, and I will in my next book too, I'm going to have a chapter, a book I'm writing hopefully soon. It's called Unholy Inversions, and it's kind of like how we flipped everything. And one of the chapters is going to be, again, I'm not against annulments because there are legitimate impediments to marriage. But what I am against is what we do only in America, it seems, which is this reflexive seeking of annulment no matter what. Your marriage isn't going well, or you got to get a divorce first because that's required, and then then you can here's a workshops and pamphlets. You want to get into the annulment funnel. You want to get in there, And I'm like, well, not everybody does that. Not other nations, and never previous to the 1970s, I think, in any Catholic era did we reflexively tell people, your marriage probably isn't valid. You might as well try for it. See if you get your annulment. So I've started to think, and I talk to a lot of people now about this, because I just talked to a man yesterday for 2 hours. He's like, I've been told by everyone to get an annulment. My pastor, my friends, my family. He said one person said, no, you're married. And why would you even go there? And he said, and that was his brother. And he said, that's the only voice. And then he said, and then I knew your work. And he said, I just thought I'd ask you, why should I not? Why should I not? So we had like a 2-hour conversation. And what I told him about is something that I told Drew Mariani about on, the Catholic radio. I've told a lot of people through different articles in Catholic Answers that I've written. There is something we never talk about, which is standing. And it's a term that I think it came from Protestantism, because some Protestants are like, no divorce, nothing. We stand for our vow till death. Well, actually, that's what you promise at the time of your vow. So instead of reflexively going to look to see if you can get an annulment, which I'm going to say something maybe controversial, maybe not, you almost always will. I mean, in America, it's not. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. I always knew, even before I was like wary of always going to the tribunal, I always was like, oh yeah, I would even ask myself, well, I wonder if my marriage is valid. Everybody in America kind of was like, I wonder if I could get it. Like, not that I would, but I'd be like, it just seems everybody I know gets one if they want one. And it might take a couple of years, but they'll eventually get one or appeal it or get it. So I'm like, okay, wow. But there's this concept that JP2 talked about actually in Familiaris Consortio, which is when a marriage breaks down, the people, and it's like number 18 or 25 or 28, I'm not sure. But when a marriage breaks down, those who stand faithfully, and it's lonely, and they are, it's hard, the church needs to see them as witnesses. The church needs to support them. And they are basically, he doesn't use the word heroes, but that's what he's getting at when he's saying this is like a witness to the world of fidelity, because that's Christ-like fidelity. Christ-like fidelity is standing till death with your promise to your spouse, even if your spouse is horrible. Like, we are Christ's spouse and we're terrible to him. And he went to the cross for us and didn't ask any questions. He just said, I'm faithful till death. And so there's this now new kind of up and coming, just like the children of divorce weren't heard, now we're starting to hear from standers. And they kind of think they're the only ones. And then now there's little support groups that are starting where like, well, everybody's telling me to get my annulment. Everybody's telling me to move on and get another romance. And even people in the Catholic Church, move on, or at least find out. And it's like, okay, is that a healing that we're trying to get them to, or is it a temptation? Because what if they just didn't look into it and just said, I was married. I'm married in the Catholic Church. I loved my wife. My wife loved me. My husband loved me. We had witnesses, and I can't, unless you can think of something seriously wrong, like maybe he had another family. Maybe he got a vasectomy, 2 weeks before the wedding and didn't tell you. I mean, all those types of things. Yes, that's like, oh, bingo. Yeah, that's not, that's an impediment. But if it's just like, was I ready? Was I, maybe I was immature. Maybe I came from a divorced home. Okay, well, yeah, you can dig and find that. I have a blog post where I have a tribunal psychologist who anonymously, I know her identity because I've talked to her and I know everything, but anonymously, because she's like, I don't want to, put my name out there. But she said, I had to stop after a while because I knew that I could conceivably make every marriage null. Like, as a psychologist, she could find something. And so these standards are actually saying, we may live a lonely life. This may be, something that everybody mocks us for, and we're patted on the head, like, there's something wrong with you. Everybody else has moved on. What's wrong with you? But they give this Christ-like witness, suffering, sacrifice, loneliness, and I really think we need more standers, more people who say this is worth it to me. And so anyway, so that's a whole other thing. The abandoned spouse. And in fact, this is what I love. the tribunal head in Gallup is Father Nathaniel Block, and he's a very holy young priest, late 30s, I think. And he and I wrote together something recently on my blog called The Heart of the Abandoned Spouse, and it's a remedy against reflexive annulment. And he wrote the bulk of it, which was just like, what do we do when we've been abandoned? How are we supposed to take this? And anyway, it's quite beautiful, but nobody's really thinking that way anymore, which is like, you stand for your vow. You stand as a witness, and then see what God does. Because a lot of times he can redeem this marriage, and the family can be intact. So he's wonderful. We kind of have this dream. I do, at least. I've always had this dream, and a couple of pastors of mine also are really good on this. But instead of having all the annulment pamphlets in the back of every vestibule, which is very tempting, like, let me just get out of this. We want a pamphlet that has that kind of, what to do if you're an abandoned spouse. How can the church help you? How can Christ, how can we support you in standing for your marriage as a witness to everyone in your parish and to the community? And I would love to see that be the shift rather than, kind of this reflexive going to annulment, which again has its place. I'm not saying that. So
yeah. And I think moving forward, it would be helpful for us as Catholics to understand that a Catholic marriage, is sacramental, that there's a covenant that takes place. That's why it's not happening on the beach. It's happening at the altar. And it's a covenant between the man, the woman, and God. And so for us to say that didn't happen, we can't be flippant about it just because we want people to be sponsors at a baptism. I'm sorry. As you were sharing all that,
got to deal with that a lot, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, at the parish, it's you want to go through RCIA or whatever it might be, and you want to sponsor someone, and we're quick to help. I mean, we want to help, but we don't. We can help by educating. I'm sorry. That's just kind of what we have.
I taught
really
RCA
do.
for 5 years, late 90s, early 2000s. And it was like everyone coming in was like needed an annulment or needed, this and that, or wanted to be a sponsor or wanted to. And it's like, oh gosh, and that's the problem with the sexual revolution. Divorce is, Peter Kraft, I think, was the one who said, if divorce was not connected to sex in some way, which it is, marriage is connected to sex, then what we know from social science of the harms of divorce, if it weren't connected to sex, it would be outlawed because everyone would see how much harm it does to society. But because it's part of, we need to be free, right? We need to be free to have our romances, and the adults that's their right. Then we let it slide, even though it does so much damage, and all secular social science bears that out, but we just ignore it.
Well, we're right up near the time here.
Wow.
I know, but we
It's
can
been
ask
a
you
great discussion.
a
Wow.
billion more
You guys
questions.
are great.
You're great.
This could go. I mean, seriously, these are the kind of discussions we need to be having.
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
and it really does. I was going to say about the Drew Mariani thing. So I've written a piece on standing, but staying, strong for your vow, even if your spouse doesn't. And so he got me on this radio show, and it was supposed to be half an hour. And it was people were calling in fast and furious, and all of the callers were positive to what we were saying. It was incredible. So he expanded it to an hour, and then we still couldn't get to all the callers. And then he replayed it that Saturday. But the interesting thing was during the talk, he said, he's been interviewing for years, hundreds and hundreds of people on every subject, marriage. And he said, I've never heard of this as like a movement, or that people would stand for their marriage. And that kind of thing blows my mind, because we are about marriage. If one entity in the entire world should be about marriage and marriage indissolubility, sacramental marriage indissolubility and all that, it should be the Catholic Church.
Amen.
So we have to go back to being known for that. Like, we will fight for marriage. We will fight. We are the ones in this world of divorce who will fight for the marriages and the families and the children. So let's get back to that.
Yes.
That's what I'm begging people.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Oh,
No, thank you so much for coming on today. We
Oh,
would
you
hope
guys are
to have
amazing.
you
It was a
in the
pleasure
future
having you.
to tackle the rest of the questions that we had here.
Oh gosh, that's great. I mean, you guys are not a hostile crowd, so I love it. I'll come back anytime. I mean,
No, we're sorry for the hostile ones.
Appreciate
but yeah,
it.
just to no, especially our title of the podcast is Dramatic Catholics, and that plays to exactly like who you are and like what you stand for. Is like we should be fighting this countercultural idea of like what marriage is and ought to be, and that is just very dramatic. So we thank you for. I thought we were
it's a great.
Thank you for being dramatic.
It's a great. I'm
And
very
for being
dramatic.
dramatic.
Sorry, I know it's like I sometimes maybe a little
It's
too
a
dramatic.
compliment. It's a compliment.
Well, I love the name of this podcast.
He was saying, he's like, thanks for advocating for us, for the ones who don't didn't
yeah.
have a voice. So it's like, thank you.
It's something that God, like I said, I was guilty of being on the other side. So, the fact that this happened is only a God thing. And I'm so glad I'm able to do it. And, God willing, he won't, shut me up for a little while, but it has to be. And more and more people are speaking. That's the joy of it. Like more and more people really are catching on to this and realizing, this is something we need to talk about. So you guys, I mean, this is brave because honestly, people don't really want to hear about it. So the fact that you're, this has been an amazing talk about it.
Yeah,
with
both
no
of our
holds
priests were
barred.
like, do it.
That's
you know?
so fantastic. Yeah, I've got some great priests too who are like, they get it, and they're not afraid anymore. And the more people aren't afraid, we get our courage. It's contagious too. Like divorce is contagious. Courage is also contagious.
Well said.
Amen.
Well, would you like to lead us in just a quick closing prayer?
I would love to.
right.
I would just, in the name of the Father,
Father,
Son,
the Son,
Holy
and the Holy
Spirit,
Spirit.
amen. Dear Father, we thank you so much for having brought us together and that you're kind of enlightening people about the issues that you gave to us from the moment of creation, the things that you gave to us as gifts and that we have squandered, and giving us this chance to go back, look at what you gave us and how simple and beautiful it is, and just be part of restoring that. So give us the grace that we need to keep speaking and keep working. And can if you don't mind, in the name of Jesus, I pray that you'll keep us going, God. And I would love to end with a prayer to Saint Michael because of how desperately, the enemy wants to take marriages. And so, if we could end with a prayer to Saint Michael. Saint Michael, the archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there anything you want to plug?
Oh, goodness. I would just say, please pick up a copy of Primal Loss or Impossible Marriages Redeemed. My website is leilamiller.net. So it's Leila Miller.net. And if you don't want to buy the book, please just go to the PDF form, which is leilamiller.net/Primal Loss PDF. And also leilamiller.net/Impossible Marriages Redeemed PDF. And you can have both those books for free. Send them to anyone you want. And just let's get this word out that we need to save marriages, help the children who are suffering so greatly, and be aware of their pain.
I needed to say this, I forgot, but I know there's deacons and priests who are making this a required read for marriage prep.
Oh, wonderful.
So for those of you who are listening, and there's that idea.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I did hear also that the seminarians sometimes are required to read this, especially depending on their own background. If they come from a family divorce, this would be something that is I think required reading, or it was at one point. So hopefully still is, to get at those wounds and understand where we're all coming from.
Awesome. Well, thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
so much.
And we'll see you next time on
Dramatic Catholics.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.